then as they dive into it, they realize, well, actually, I think I have some skills to do it. I just don't have the time to do it. So then they start looking into, well, it's not strategic thinking. I actually need to build out my time management. And then as they start diving into the time management more, they realize I'm doing too much. I'm just doing too much. I'm not fully utilizing my team. So then it goes to, I need to learn how to delegate more. I need to learn how to, and so all of that journey and that path is so common because the tactical pull that we're being sucked into each and every day is so strong.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the Leadership Growth Hour, an interactive monthly event that features timely leadership topics and tools to grow your leadership performance. I'm your host, Daniel Stewart, executive consultant and coach and president of Stewart Leadership, a global consulting, coaching, and training firm aligning organizations on leadership, teaming, change, and talent. In short, we develop the people side to enable your growth strategies. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Peter Stewart, PhD. This is his second appearance on the Leadership Growth Hour, and welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Daniel. It's a joy to chat with you and to join again. Sure enjoyed the last chat we had. And it's fun looking at this group of those attending. Many names are familiar. And it's wonderful to have this time to dive deep into this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as folks are familiar with this a little bit, the show is divided into two parts. The first half is content, conversation, and a few slides on a specific leadership topic. The second part is open Q&A from the audience on any topic without any slides. As we are talking throughout, please write your questions and answers or questions and comments in the Q&A feature. The chat feature is not enabled. We have enabled the upvote feature though. So you can click the thumbs up on questions you like, which will put them first on the list for us to answer. Also, we will link our slides in the show notes later on. Now on to today's focus area, lead now with relationships and results. So Peter, here's the opening question for you. Why do we have to say both of those words, relationships and results? What gets confused if we don't say both of those ideas?
I think it's a great way to kick things off. It's just fundamental to being a solid, complete leader. We can't get too focused on just delivering of what it is we're being tasked to do or what our customers want. We have to pay attention to how we're doing it. So it's not just the what, it's also the how. And the people are an important part of that. So you have to recognize the needs, you have to recognize the processes, you have to recognize the environment and the culture that you're creating as you are trying to accomplish and execute on the services or products or whatever the deliverable is for your organization.
Yeah, it's well said. I was reading recently, so Sandy Pentland, Dr. Sandy Pentland, he leads MIT's Human Dynamics Lab, and he has done so much work in AI and in understanding robotics and the relationship we have with technology. And something he recently said was, the one thing that robots cannot take away from us is our ability to build relationships. You know, the transactional elements, providing information, all of that. But the heart-to-heart, the stuff that truly makes us human, that relationship building is so critical. And sometimes when we get stressed, when we're in conflict, when we're trying to solve problems that are incredibly complex, which pretty much describes a lot of what we do, we as humans can sometimes forget the human side of it, forget our human side and the other people's human side as we're striving to get stuff done.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, you're really highlighting the need for that human bond, and that bond, that connection that technology can't replace that. And then the synergies that come from it as you're working together and collaborating and those ideas. But I love the point you're making in terms of, yeah, we have to recognize these relationships and we have to prioritize them to a certain degree. They can't be everything. You can't just, you still have to be able to do the function and purpose of your organization. But absolutely, we have to focus on the relationships. And so it then leads to that question of, what are things we can do? What are ways in which we can better understand, better manage, better build the relationships that we have in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a good one. And in fact, let me share my screen. There's just a couple of slides we want to focus on. The first is talking through this idea that there are 4 critical relationships that any leader has. Any leader has these, and there are uniquenesses that are involved within each of these critical relationships. And Peter, as you're thinking of this first one, the boss relationship, and this is so fascinating to me because even if somebody has not been a boss before, a leader, manager, supervisor, whatever, when they then become this, they start thinking like this. So how would you describe what this is? What is that language of the boss? How would you describe it?
That language of the boss, or the language of the bosses, if it's more of a matrixed organization, as you find yourself in that you position of this cross, it's recognizing that there are stakeholders who have expectations on how the performance of this business is doing. And even if you're CEO, president, you might be the head of the organization, there's still going to be most likely a board of directors of some kind or some set of stakeholders that you're having to answer to, who's going to be looking after, are you doing your part to be a good steward, to grow, and to keep this business moving along? And so it really is that focus on the business results. Are you executing and delivering and hitting the targets that need to happen? And so that's the language of the boss. And so individuals as leaders, we have to recognize that. So then it does impact the way we interact with the boss as we're thinking about their needs and how we best become that aspirin for their headache, so to speak.
Yeah, I love it. And then remembering, yeah, it's all about their needs. It's not so much our own perspective. And so with that as a first one, instead of asking you, Peter, I'm going to ask the group here. We have a lot of folks listening. In the Q&A feature, I'd like people to comment and write down some ideas. What are the things that the direct reports care most about? These are the folks who are on your team who report to you. You are their boss, so to speak. You are their supervisor. What do they care most about? What are the things on their minds that they often go to first? What matters most to them? Go ahead in the Q&A and start writing down some aspects here. What is it that matters to them? And I'm seeing the communication, absolutely. The flow, especially two-way, and then the hitting goals, development, figuring out what are my expectations? What are the expectations? Can I reach them? Peter, what else are you seeing on this chat?
Yeah, looking at the recognition and appreciation is big. The career growth and opportunities, and how that, and we can double click on that one a little bit, even how that role of the organization in helping advance somebody's career has really changed, and having that dialogue, that discussion, that development, so the personal growth, and it's not just the professional growth. I mean, there's so much that's being demanded and expected in the workplace. And if we're just looking at the boss and the direct report relationship, over the last couple decades, and particularly over these last 5 years or so, I'm not sure there's more of a relationship that has adjusted and the needs have changed and expanded as this direct report relationship. They want so much more. from you as their supervisor, as their manager. They want a coach, they want a mentor, they want an advisor, so many hats to wear.
Yeah. And you mentioned across these past few years, for all this pandemic aspect and the remote and hybrid virtual workspace, as we've seen the control kind of shift away from the organization to more control held by the employees in terms of what needs to be happening, this shift of power and control has been very interesting. And seeing over the past just 3 to 6 months, that is slowly shifting back to the organization, especially with economic uncertainty, with labor shortages decreasing just a little, so that people will then need organizations a little bit more, how this kind of give and take. And I mention that because that has a direct impact on the needs of a hybrid workplace. The blurring of the personal and the professional, even more so, requires us, as we're talking, as we're interacting with employees, as well as ourselves as employees, we care about certain things even more. And when we don't hear those, we can sit back and go, are they speaking my language? And are they connecting? And do I belong as well?
Yeah, that concept of belonging is key. And as I've been saying for the last few years, this is the decade of the employee. In many ways, it's a focus on their needs, and they're going to be shouting very loudly with their feet as they move to organizations where they feel valued, they feel they're developed, they feel they're understood, they feel that their daily activities are helping to accomplish a greater purpose. And those are the commonalities that we're seeing more and more. So it does require a bit of a different viewpoint, requires more increasing communication, and not just communication for communication's sake, but it's more personal. It's more of those conversations and discussions about life, about where they want to go, about the support that they need, about the level of direction that they need. All of those help to foster and strengthen these relationships.
Oh, I love it. Okay, third critical relationship, Peter. As we think of not folks necessarily that we report to, or who report to us if we're a leader or manager, it's the peers, it's the lateral perspective. And whether it's a project team, whether it's peers at a similar level throughout the organization, what do they care most about? What would you say? And frankly, before you answer, I'd love to see some comments by others here, because people have been commenting great comments around, and very accurate, related to the direct reports. As you're thinking about peers, what is their language? What do they care most about? I'm curious, as people are reflecting on that, jot down some thoughts in the Q&A to identify what is it that peers care most about. Because I find it so interesting. A peer might say, I'm so glad you're hitting your numbers, with your boss, and your boss likes you. And I'm so glad your team is happy and have clear expectations. But what about me? What are my needs? And I'm just wondering, as we're kind of looking through this, and we're starting to see some of this, particularly around this collaboration idea, and wanting to understand, what is it that you can count on from me and I can count on from you? Where are those handoff points? And let's make it clear. Absolutely. Peter, what else are you seeing or thinking about as you're hearing this?
I think you're really identifying some key points where those handoff points are clear, where there are the intersections, the collaboration. It's the point at which your goals and my goals as peers intersect. How dependent are we on each other? And it really is, as you're highlighting here on the slide, it's that internal focus. It's that operational side. It's how can we work together to accomplish those goals? And how do we share the resources we need? Helping ensure one person isn't hogging all the buckets and pails in the sandbox, but are we willing to play nice and adopt some of these philosophies I'm seeing in the chat of being that team of teams, where you recognize the individuality of the respective pockets of activity, but understanding the synchronicity that's required in order to accomplish those. And so there's some dependability you can count on. So this is a great, man, we have fabulous participants here in the audience as they're highlighting some of these thoughts. Can you get to the win-win? You know, can you anticipate and over communicate and demonstrate value? Really good insights coming in here.
And even this empathy component, do you understand the challenges that I'm experiencing? And what does that mean for me and you as we work together? Do you appreciate the pressures that I have? And also there's an element of fairness. Do we understand how resources are allocated, how budget, how different equipment or supplies are allocated across different departments? And is that done in a fair way that I understand the overall rationale for it? Because that is going to help me understand not only the bigger picture, but avoid resentment or, wait a minute, why do you get this? And because there's a comparison, and it's a different kind of relationship than with a direct reports or boss. It's just this comparison component.
Yeah. It really is. I think that comparison is very clear. And others have called this relationship with the peers, it's like that's your first team or your primary team, and how do you prioritize that? Because one can get very focused and I would say sometimes distracted too narrowly in this north-south relationship in the chart here of that boss and direct report. But you cannot ignore your peers. When times, are more stressful and more challenging, they're also the ones you can reach out to for that support, for that, consultation. They're a broader network that you can glean from and get support from, but you have to be investing in those relationships in order to gain that support.
And you reminded me one other comment around the peers. I don't know if you've seen this, Peter, or if you've noticed, but one of the lesser learning mechanisms that we don't pay as much attention to is peer learning. Somehow we don't focus on that quite as much at times. And yet the amount that we can learn and we can grow as we're open to learning from peers and taking the time to learn and asking for their opinion, even if it's outside of our function or our expertise, all the more reason to help challenge our thinking, to learn where they're going and what we can apply, what transferable notions and ideas. This peer learning is powerful. We often seek to build it into different leadership programs because it sometimes is neglected or not paid attention to and optimized as much as it could be.
I completely agree. And to interject in that even deeper, as you introduce that idea of micro experts, it's looking around and recognizing at a skill level, at an individual kind of skill targeted, you're surrounded by people who are really, really good at certain things. Does this mean they're good at everything? No, none of us are. But as you hone in on and observe, to say, who are those people really good at a certain thing? This person's really good at time management. What can I glean or learn from them? They seem to really be good at strategic thinking or delegating or fill in the blank of whatever skill you might want to be developing and growing in. And having that conversation, as we circle back to one of the topics in the beginning about AI and technology and its place in the workplace, great, you can Google articles and other things to learn, and that content can be very helpful. But some of the most impactful conversations you have is that peer-to-peer conversation. The question where you're a little vulnerable saying, hey, I want to grow on this. Sounds like it seems to me like you're really good at it. What are some tips you're willing to share? Those foster relationships and dive deep into some opportunities for growth.
Well said. Well said. As we think of this fourth critical relationship, the customer. Okay, so folks, everybody who's listening, what do the customers care most about? How would you frame this up? How would you describe this? Because this is outside of the organization. These are folks who don't report to you. You don't work with them every day in terms of getting stuff done necessarily internally. You don't report, they don't report, what does this mean? What are the things that customers care most about? What would you say? What would you say as you're thinking? And Peter, your comments, your thoughts as you're thinking through this, and as we're seeing more of the comments from others, what do the customers care most about?
And I think even as I've had this conversation many times with others, as we dive into this question of customers, usually a hand goes up real quick saying, are we talking about internal or external customers? And my response is yes. It's however you define that, because it applies similar to whether it is an external or an internal customer. It's really identifying what are their needs and how do you anticipate and prepare for and deliver on those needs even before they realize they have the need. That is true, strong, customer-focused relationships there.
Yeah, I appreciate this, and I'm seeing great comments here, especially around are they meeting my expectations in terms of the value that I want? And is it consistent? Do they know my needs? Do they know my needs before I do? And do they know the alternatives that I have in the marketplace that I can then choose and quickly gravitate to and no longer work with them in some way? And to be able to balance that and continue to reinforce, yes, as we partner together in this effort, whatever that is, transaction, product, service, you are getting value. You are getting value, and it's worth it for you. And that's where so much of this, we often call it the external focus, to be able to then encapsulate what that means around the customer focus. It's external to the organization, looking at the broader marketplace. As you're hearing this, yeah, please jump on in.
Yeah, I was just saying, as you're highlighting, it's that external focus, anticipating the needs. And just as I'm glancing at all of these relationships and some of the commonalities, and think of how does somebody display and show respect to all of these relationships as you're interacting with them, and the role and the critical role that plays for each of those, even from that customer side. Daniel, as you're highlighting the awareness that they have other options in the marketplace. And do you respect that? And do you respect their decision-making process as you're building those relationships? But what are some of your thoughts as we play on that notion of how do you demonstrate respect across these relationships?
Yeah, that's a great one. And actually kind of answering that, building on, why does it matter by identifying the uniqueness across all of them? Because in some ways, showing respect is coupled with this idea of personalizing how you approach each person and not treating them as if the way that you just want to be treated all the time, but rather at paying attention to how they want to be treated. What are the unique pressures and challenges that they have? And frankly, one of the most effective ways of showcasing respect is to approach it from their angle. And that's where, Peter, as you're looking at these four, why do we even need to break these out? What's the advantage then to have these four specifically broken out? Why can't we just look at one of these and go, they could just deal with the numbers? And that's exactly the angle that we want to go. Or let's just all have this engagement empathy component. Why the value of looking at the uniqueness of each of these four relationships?
That's a great question, Daniel. And really, to break down these four critical relationships, it helps you answer the one critical question. And it's this: what do they need from you? If you spend time thinking about the uniqueness of that and answering that question, it's going to give you an opportunity to strengthen and build and nurture those relationships. Now then, on the flip side, you're able to ask, what do I need from them? And as you take that time to assess, can you communicate that clearly? Are you able to articulate that? Are those needs, really necessary? Are they clear? So it allows for that analysis of how you are interacting with them and monitoring those needs bidirectionally. So then you have the opportunity to strengthen. And you don't just do it as a category, but you give each of these individuals individual attention. So by name, saying, okay, I have a boss or a boss 2 or boss 3, write their name and ask the question, what do they need from me? And then what do I need from them? And as you go around these 4 critical relationships, we'll often call this the Iron Cross, as assessing that, it really helps you learn, where do I need to build some relationships and strengthen? Which ones are solid? Which ones may be teetering? Where should I invest my time? Because we are all have what can be called time poverty. We're lacking in it. We need more of it, but there's only so much. So how do you focus your efforts?
Yeah. So building on this, we have business results and people results. And again, just like the title here and the opening question around why have both, why do we focus in both? It matters. And we usually define them differently versus simply focusing on the business results side, the managerial bias that can sometimes come up, that can sometimes dominate, and we can treat all of these relationships the same, which is not the point. So something cool happens as we anchor around the uniqueness of each of these relationships. We're able to then start to see critical leadership behaviors to help us achieve the relationships and the results. Some of you may have seen some of this before, and it's really important for us to have this top of mind. Peter, what happens when business results intersects with an external focus? What emerges?
When you have the business results with an external, or what I'll call sometimes a future focus, it really focuses on the need to create that purpose, to identify what is the strategy, how is that going to be communicated and presented to others? What are ways in which you can build that and align people around that common goal and purpose. So that really leads it there. And so it helps pop that area of emphasis, because the goal here is really trying to build leadership capacity and capability and skills, but it's grounded in an understanding of these key relationships and the needs that they have. So as we're heading down this journey across these areas, you have the business results, external focus is creating purpose, but business results more internally driven, that's where it's the delivering excellence. Daniel, you want to head into that quadrant?
Yeah, and what's interesting as the business results intersects with internal focus and this deliver excellence, this is the technical, this is the craftsmanship, so to speak. This is the expertise that we bring into our job. And what's also interesting is this is usually how and why we get promoted, because we often get promoted based upon this technical expertise. And then we say, hey, you're now a manager, you're a supervisor, just keep doing that and now this additional responsibility. When in fact, it is a completely different skill set. However, delivering excellence still remains top of mind. It needs to be. It just needs to be done at a different level in a different manner, as maybe we've done it before, as we continue to elevate our role in an organization. And then as internal focus intersects with people results, it's all about developing self and others to be able to then build a great team and to coach and share feedback with each other and schedule our lives in a way that we value relationships and the people instead of simply the business side of it. So it's that balancing of both. And Peter, as you're looking at that last intersection quadrant, talk a little bit about this leading change element.
So as you are leading change in the quadrant, it's the people results side, but more externally or even future focused. And how do you transition into what needs to be different? Recognizing that what we have always done is not always going to work. As the environments and the marketplace, everything continues to shift. So this is a focus on how do we identify the needs and changes necessary, then how do you effectively allow that change to perform and to roll through an organization? So there's change management skills needed, there's innovation that's required, inspiring people to keep focused and committed to those change efforts when they're it gets a long haul. Not all change efforts are, okay, wake up one morning, oh, we're done by 5 o'clock. No, some of these are months and months that take, and it can be really be a challenge, but a good, great leader is able to keep that fire, to keep that motivation and focus as you're leading individuals through the change.
That's a great, beautiful insight, especially in terms of how to help earn the heart and the head for both of those. And that's a critical skill. And so as we look at the foundation of building great relationships and understanding what each relationship truly needs, these 4 great expectations of great leadership emerge for us to then compare ourselves to and to aspire to and to build around. So we'll go to the next step, and then we'll turn off the slides here and keep chatting on all sorts of other topics all around building relationships and results. As many of you may have seen before, this actually is the journey that's led to the Lead Now leadership development model. It's all based upon the relationship focus and achieving business and people results. And then we can go one more step, looking at the 21 different leadership dimensions or skills for us to kind of look at and go, what 1 or 2 might I want to work on now to help me achieve stronger business results and or people results that are, yes, embedded in key relationships as well. Peter, as you're looking at this and as you've used this model, especially around relationships so much with leaders, what have you seen? How have people utilized this? What are some reactions you have?
Oh, it's in so many ways, it helps simplify the process. Not that development is an easy thing to do, but it helps take this really ambiguous construct of leadership and trying to improve one's leadership skills. And it breaks it down into more manageable bite-sized chunks, saying, okay, I want to build this relationship, or I've just gotten some feedback that I need to work on my delegation skills, or whatever. You're then able to hone in on a particular area to put some extra emphasis on. You still got the day job, you still got everything else you're trying to accomplish, but this is now a way to just refine those abilities and skills, to just increase the tools in your toolkit. And then it's also somewhat of a cheat sheet to say, hey, if I want to be improving this relationship with my boss, for example, let me focus on this Northern Hemisphere. Let's look at quadrants 1 and 2. Are there particular areas there that I can build and grow and develop in order to deliver those business results a little bit better? Or on the flip side, I want to build some relationships stronger with my people, with my direct reports. Okay, let's look at quadrants 3, the blue, and 4, the purple, because those are the areas as you're targeting, it's going to require interaction with your direct reports and strengthen the relationships. And then analogously, you can look at internal and external focus with peers and customers as well. So it just provides that direction so the whole process doesn't feel as overwhelming. It's little bite-sized chunks.
I love it. I'm going to stop sharing for the moment here, but we can keep chatting through this. And in fact, Peter, as you're thinking of the Lead Now model with the top 2 related to business results and the bottom 2 quadrants relating to people results, what are some of the leadership dimensions within it that you see people most often needing to focus in? What would you say?
Here's one that comes up all the time, and it is a journey of self-awareness. You have a leader who says, I need more time to develop strategic thinking. So that's quadrant 1. Quadrant 1 in creating purpose. That doesn't show. I was going to show my little thing. So quadrant 1. And then as they dive into it, they realize, well, actually, I think I have some skills to do it. I just don't have the time to do it. So then they start looking into, well, not strategic thinking. I actually need to build out my time management. And then as they start diving into the time management more, they realize I'm doing too much. I'm just doing too much. I'm not fully utilizing my team. So then it goes to, I need to learn how to delegate more. I need to learn how to, and so all of that journey and that path is so common because the tactical pull that we're being sucked into each and every day is so strong. And finding that team trust where you can delegate and carving out that time specifically to build those strategic skills, it doesn't just happen unless you intentionally are focusing on it. So that's one common development conversation that I've had countless times.
Yeah, I can so relate. So here's another question for you. When I say emotional intelligence, EQ, because it so much relates to the relationship element that we've been talking about, where does that fit in terms of this model? What does this model help to do to inform people how to build their emotional intelligence?
It takes you straight to the Southern Hemisphere. When you're talking about EQ and really trying to hone that, and EQ, emotional intelligence, it's the awareness we have about our own emotional experience and the impact it has on our own actions, and then the awareness of the impact it has on others and how that then influences and impacts their actions. So all of that is really honing in on that Southern Hemisphere of the model in quadrants 3 and 4. When you're looking at managing one's ego, being open to feedback, listening to others, developing, coaching, valuing them, inspiring commitment, all of those are components that help to lead directly to somebody's ability to build their EQ. And the good thing about EQ, it is highly malleable, meaning anybody can build it. So when you start focusing on, okay, here's an area I want to build, as you do that, you start to see those ripple effects where it actually starts to influence other dimensions and other areas, not just in EQ, but in the broader context of leadership.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Okay, so here's a question for the group, and I'll share the screen one more time because here's the question. I want everybody to identify what is the one leadership dimension that they might want to focus on, because so much of this is picking one and then being able to move forward with it and do something about it. So I'm going to share the screen again, and some of you could also go on terms of on our website if you want to look at it, but let me just put this up as a reminder. And as you then look at this, type in the chat, what is the one leadership dimension out of the 21 that you would want to focus on that would help you achieve business and people results? Because again, as I mentioned, so much of this is picking something and being able to push. And Peter, I'm going to ask you the same question. Are you ready?
Yeah.
What would you want to work on for you as a leader, as you are then building so much extra leadership and interacting with so many clients, as people are able to put in their own in the chat, what's the one that you would suggest you'd want to work on?
That's a good question, because it's not just a framework for others. We try and drink our own Kool-Aid development. We have our own personal plans. And for me right now, I'm working on dimension 19 as far as innovation, helping to ensure that we are continually improving, not just the internal processes as we're running the organization, but looking out for ways where we can better meet the needs of our customers and clients. So that's an area that I've been focusing on, building my plan. And I think you asked a really good question as people are answering in the chat of what is one area they want to target. And the question you can ask in addition to that is, what is one area that would have the most positive impact in my role? If you're struggling with answering that initial question, maybe that one helps clarify it. So Daniel, I'll turn the question back to you. What is one area that if you chose to focus on would have the biggest positive impact in your role?
Yeah, it's a good one. Strategic thinking is what comes to my mind. And again, all of these are needed and it's to continue to build leadership muscle in a specific area. And oftentimes we look at it for the next 2 to 3 months, what would be most helpful? And for me at this point, I'd say strategic thinking, to be able to continue to understand the marketplace, to know how to best help and serve clients where they're at, because it is continually changing and shifting. And in fact, we're seeing a lot of this, even in terms of some of the comments that people have, focusing on those results or strategic thinking, especially in a VUCA, ever-changing, volatile environment, for sure. And the leading change component, making sure we're focused on the customer. I love it. Peter, as you're seeing some of these, any reactions here?
Oh, it's one, I appreciate the participants putting in their ideas and being vulnerable to share it. Here, you're just putting it out to the world. But yeah, strategic thinking is one that comes up often. That's one of the reasons I shared that in my example. It is one of the biggest challenges for leaders today. And especially as we look at the environment over the last couple of years as we've transitioned, working through a pandemic, working through whatever the new hybrid type environment is, what this next normal is. I've stopped using the word new normal because it doesn't stay very long. So what's the next normal, and how you continually adapt and apply these things? It causes you to pull up out of the weeds, take that high level perspective, and to be able to drill down and identify some goals and plans.
I love it. Okay, so I have a question for you, Peter.
Okay.
With all of the things we've been talking about to build effective relationships, what's the one thing? What's the one thing that people need to keep in mind as they build and strengthen relationships with others? What would you say?
The one most important thing people need to do to build strong relationships with others is to approach them from the perspective of curiosity. Listen intently, to be curious, to understand where they're coming from. If you do that, it really doesn't matter whether we're talking about a business issue or we're talking about a social issue. If you approach that from the perspective of, I want to learn and see things from your vantage point, I'm curious to learn. What is the data that you have based your opinions off of? Because it may be different than the data I'm basing my opinions off of. So when we have that opportunity to approach it with a perspective of curiosity, oh, fabulous things happen.
Oh, it's a beautiful insight, especially to juxtapose it with critique or judgment, because so often we're trained, or we are assuming that we go in and critique it or judge it or moralize it, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, instead of having that initial impression be one of, what can I learn? How can I appreciate this? How can I explore this? How can I understand this better? Two perspectives, and that's a fundamental choice. Also,
Really is.
here's another question for you. And let me frame this up and get your reactions then.
Sure.
If somebody were to ask me, what's one of those key parts of building relationships, I would say keeping in mind that every conversation happens at 2 levels. You have the content level, whatever it is we're talking about at the moment, who's coming to the meeting, when are we showing up at this event, or what's going to be happening next month on the project team. That's the content. But there's always a relationship level in every conversation. And it's those questions that we're continually asking ourselves. Do they like me? Do I like them? Do they believe I belong here? Do I want to belong here? Am I making a difference in their eyes? Do they want me to make a difference? Those are the deeper relationship aspects.
Yeah.
And I find whenever people repeat themselves a lot or need to get louder, that is usually a sign that we need to stop talking about the content and pause and start talking about the relationship. Because once the relationship is talked about and resolved, the content can move so much more quickly and more effectively. Peter, as you're hearing this, what reactions do you have in terms of your observations and how that impacts relationships?
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, it really is. And it requires conscious effort to be able to monitor both of those during a conversation. And it helps when you're able to put aside the focus on who's right and who's wrong, and am I right? And you're able to then just focus on strengthening that relationship, or I should say it more as understanding the relationship and not just the content. So you can't just focus on, well, what's my retort to what you just said? It's, oh, I really need to listen to what you've just said. And now we need to put that within the context of what is our relationship? What is some of the history that could be leading to this? What are some of the needs you're doing? So it comes back to one of the gems that I love, and it's a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And a question well defined is a question half solved. And when you're having these interactions and they're asking questions, it's the clarification of where they're coming from at the content level. But then sometimes you need to dive down deeper at that relationship level to see what is really driving that question here. So I think it's a very helpful framework, but it's not always easy to balance. So you have to remind yourself. So Daniel, how can one remind themselves to pay attention to both sides of that communication?
Yeah, that is one of the great challenges in the hectic day-to-day aspect. And it gets at the support component and our habits. And one of the most effective ways is to then identify what are your habits that you do, and to then think through, all right, when I show up to a meeting, how do I start habitually acting and behaving? Am I open? Am I closed? Am I critiquing instantly? When I open up an email and it comes from a certain person, what are the cues that I start noticing about myself? For us to sit back and to pause and reflect, what are those habits that I do and show up in those moments? That's a powerful way for us to be able to change and to make sure that we are showing up in the way that we want to show up. And it also goes back to this great leadership gem. What is it like to work for me? What is it like to work with me? What is it like to work for me? We've been talking about these relationships. Maybe we can end here on what is it like to work for me? And how do we increase that level of self-awareness? And before I turn that over to you, Peter, I also want to mention everybody who's listening here, as you have other questions, as you'd like us to focus on questions around relationships or results or anything else, please, as we're commenting here on this final area, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A, and then we can chat through them, or you're welcome to email us later on as well. So go ahead, folks, if you'd like, chime in, write down your questions here as we're finishing up our conversation around this specific topic. Peter, paying attention to and that self-assessment, that self-awareness, what is the impact and importance of that in all of this?
That self-awareness, that moment to pause, to look in the mirror, is the absolute fundamental key to all of these things we're talking about today. As we've talked about critical relationships, that pause to say, how strong are they? What do I need to do to strengthen and to build them? As we've looked at how that translates into our leadership skills and the growth there, is the ability to pause, say, where do I need to develop to have the biggest positive impact in my role? As we've talked about communication with each other, and that content and relationship is the ability to pause, to say, am I looking at this? Am I listening and approaching this in a way that is going to be most helpful? As you have that time to pause, reflect, and think of what are my habits? How do I show up? It's fundamental. And in the hectic pace of life that most of us are living, it's forcing ourselves, it's scheduling that time to pause and have some self-reflection. Even 2 to 3 minutes of that. We don't have to say, this isn't a mindfulness retreat for an entire weekend or days in a shack by a lake where all you're doing is meditating, and that can work for some people. Most of us don't have time. It's the pause for a minute or two to say, how am I doing? What can I do to be a little bit better in this area or in this area?
Absolutely. And Peter, as you're looking at double checking any questions here, I'll just add the one element that I would really strongly suggest is for us to keep in mind these two levels in every conversation, the content as well as the relationship, and actively know how to switch back and forth, pausing so that we can then acknowledge that relationship. And the other element that I'll emphasize is to regularly make a list of what are the business results and what are the people results that you're striving to achieve, and be very clear about both of those lists because they're both distinct lists, and to make sure your calendar and your activities support both. Those are critical. Peter, any questions we want to tackle as we're ending up here?
So one question logistically, wanting to have a copy of this presentation, and yes, we will be sending out links to the recording for this video as well as in a podcast format. You can listen to it either way. But there one question came asking about how organizations strive to break relationship levels down by self, others, and the organization. Viewing that as a model that stands no matter what level an individual is at, and asking for recommendations how this can be used differently, how we can maybe incorporate what we were just talking with this more typical or classic 3-level approach of self, others, and organization. What's your thought, Daniel?
Yeah, it's almost like looking at both of them and being able to leverage so we have the 4 critical relationships, and then we have these typical levels within the organization. And is it by so we have self, team, and organization. I think that what the question is looking for.
Yeah.
And within each of those, they need to build off of these 4 critical relationships. And so at the organizational level, we can look at it more from a macro perspective.
Yes.
And that's where powerful pulse and engagement and other focus groups can then help inform this. And then at the team level, understanding, essentially doing a team 360, looking at, because the peers really then become the team members themselves. And then for the self, that really is, you are in the middle, and you can then actively look at your own small group of folks. So in some ways, it's a beautiful way of building off of and leveraging the 4 critical relationships off of a more common approach of self, team, and organization as well. So those are some thoughts. Peter, as you're hearing this, anything else to add?
I think you really answered that well. And I think a point we can emphasize that some individuals don't have direct reports as we talk about those 4 critical relationships. And even as an individual contributor, you can still be monitoring the strength of those relationships. And so it's those relationships that are less based on title, and it's more about how you interact with them. And you can monitor and be aware. And maybe at a certain point in your career, there will be direct reports that come on. But I think you can look at it at all of those levels, at the self, team, organization. You can look at it boss, peer, customer, direct report. What they do, all of those do, is give you a framework to pause, do some reflection, and to say, where do I need to grow and develop or change?
Yeah.
And then it's little micro steps to get there.
I like it. And some quick comments, a few other great questions that have come in. A question around suppliers. And suppliers are one of those unique animals, and they're not exactly customers. And what we find oftentimes clients will do is think of them as peers in many ways. They're partners in the organization, because suppliers usually are on the value stream map, and to be able to then know where they insert value in an internal kind of fashion, so that you can actively then look and accomplish and deliver the value for the customer. So oftentimes we have seen organizations put suppliers in that peer category. And then also a couple of great questions on how can this be applied, the different dimensions by level. And this is the beauty of it, because what we've talked about today are the general principles. And then it can then be expanded and personalized tremendously based upon the level. And that's frankly where the individual conversations can happen. That's where the dialogue can happen to say, all right, for our culture, for our team, and there might be multiple levels in a larger team, let's further expand and understand what really are the needs at each level and each group. Because yes, these 4 critical relationships are a foundation. You can then keep making subgroups within them and further define what are the unique needs. The point is to get to that unique need and understand the pressures and challenges of each and meet them and adjust how you build, how you speak, how you then interact to their unique needs. Peter, anything to add on this one?
I think you answered that really clearly. That phrase of unique needs, I think that's something for us to be thinking about, because this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's getting it down to the unique needs. It's personalizing it to your relationships. And you're the only one who can answer those questions about what it is they can do. Now, let's say you're starting to do some assessment into those relationships and you get stuck. And you're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to build these. That notion of micro experts, who are those trusted colleagues around who you feel they've got a good handle on how to build these relationships, or how to leverage this opportunity, or how to build this skill? Ask, be willing to open. And when those sorts of dialogues become frequent within an organization, look at the impact that has on the culture, how that builds a culture that is not only just psychologically safe, but a culture that is primed for collaboration and increasing development at all levels.
It's well said. Well said. Well, Peter, thank you for the great conversation and for being part of the Leadership Growth Hour.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation. Always a joy.
Absolutely. And thanks to everybody for the great comments and the activity, the engagement here. Fantastic, fantastic conversation. To register for future Leadership Growth Hour events, please visit stewartleadership.com/events. We'd love to have you join us. Till next time, take care.